Snow had been falling for 3 days straight in Black Ridge, Colorado, the kind of relentless winter that swallowed roads, silenced cell towers, and made the mountains feel alive, watching, waiting. The town sat wedged between frozen pines and sheer rock faces, a forgotten dot most people passed without noticing. Fewer than 2,000 residents, one police station, one diner, and tonight, one dangerous mistake unfolding in real time. Emily Carter stood just outside the sheriff's office, breath fogging the air, gloved hands wrapped around a paper cup of burnt coffee. She wore a plain gray parka, scuffed boots, and a knit cap pulled low. Nothing about her stood out. No badge, no uniform, no rank. Just another volunteer who'd shown up when the storm knocked out power to half the county. Inside, radios crackled nonstop. Repeat, suspect vehicle, abandoned near mile marker 17. Negative visual, winds killing visibility. Be advised, armed and dangerous. Former contractor, military background unknown. Emily listened without comment, eyes fixed on the dark ridge line beyond town. Snow whipped sideways, driven by mountain wind that howled like something alive. She had lived here quietly for 3 years, working at the hardware store, renting a small cabin at the edge of the tree line. She paid cash. She kept to herself. People knew her as polite, helpful, forgettable. That was exactly how she wanted it. The sheriff's door burst open. Sheriff Dan Holloway, broad-shouldered and red-faced from stress, barked orders as deputies rushed past her toward their cruisers. "We've got families stranded up the pass," he snapped. "If that guy moves east, he'll hit the ranger station. We cannot let that happen." A deputy scoffed under his breath. "In this weather, he won't last an hour." Emily's jaw tightened slightly. She said nothing. A younger officer noticed her standing there. "Ma'am, station's closed to civilians. You need to head home." "I'm already cleared as a volunteer," Emily replied calmly. Her voice was steady, low, no tremor, no attitude. The officer hesitated, then waved her off. "Fine, just stay out of the way." She nodded and stepped aside, watching as armed men loaded rifles, checked optics, and adjusted body cams with exaggerated confidence. They were good cops, trained, brave, but Emily could see what they couldn't. They were rushing. Inside the briefing room, a large map of the mountain pass was pinned to the wall. Thermal imagery flickered on a screen, distorted by the storm. The suspect, Mark Jensen, had vanished after crashing his SUV during a high-speed pursuit. Former mercenary, wanted for multiple homicides, and now loose in terrain that could kill an unprepared man in minutes. Emily drifted closer to the doorway, unnoticed. "The pass narrows here," a deputy said, pointing. "Only 2 routes through." "And both are nightmares in this wind," another replied. Sheriff Holloway rubbed his temples. "We hold perimeter, wait for state support." Emily spoke before she could stop herself. "He won't wait." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Holloway frowned. "Excuse me." "He's trained," Emily said, stepping forward just enough to be seen. "He'll move while you're setting up. He'll use the storm for cover, and he won't take the main routes." A few deputies exchanged amused looks. "And you know this how?" one asked. Emily met his gaze evenly. "Because that's what I would do." A beat passed, then someone chuckled. Another deputy shook his head. "Look, lady, we appreciate the help, but this isn't a movie." Emily felt the familiar sting. Not anger, not anymore, just resignation. She'd heard it before, everywhere, for years. Holloway cleared his throat. "Thanks for the input, Emily, really, but we've got this." She nodded once and stepped back, disappearing into the background again. Minutes later, the first shot rang out. It came from far up the mountain, too far. A sharp crack that cut through the wind and echoed off the cliffs. Radios erupted instantly. "Officer down, officer down." Emily's heart dropped. They rushed the injured deputy inside, blood soaking through his sleeve where a round had torn clean through muscle without hitting bone. A warning shot. Precise. Deliberate. That wasn't random, Emily whispered to herself. Panic rippled through the room now. The suspect wasn't fleeing blindly, he was testing them. Thermal cameras struggled, drones lost signal, visibility shrank to nothing. Jensen had chosen his moment perfectly. Holloway slammed a fist on the table. We're blind out there. Emily stepped forward again. This time no one laughed. He's watching your response times, she said. Your radio delays, your spacing. A deputy swallowed. How do you? Because he's hunting, Emily said quietly, and he's good at it. Silence stretched. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow buried footprints within seconds. The mountain erased evidence as fast as it appeared. Holloway studied her face, really looking now. You ever been in combat, Emily? She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, long enough. I've been trained, she answered. That was all. Another radio call crackled through. Sheriff, we've lost contact with the ranger station. Emily's gaze snapped to the map. Her breath slowed. Her posture changed, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. He's going there, she said. Holloway looked at her, the weight of the moment pressing down. And if you're wrong? Emily met his eyes. Then I'll walk back into the storm and never bother you again. The sheriff exhaled sharply. Outside, the wind screamed through the mountain pass like a warning. And for the first time since the storm began, Emily Carter was no longer invisible. The ranger station sat alone at the narrowest bend of Black Ridge Pass, a squat concrete structure half buried by snowdrifts and pine shadows. In summer, tourists stopped there for maps and souvenirs. In winter, it became a shelter of last resort, a place people prayed they'd never need. Tonight, its lights were still on. Inside the sheriff's office, tension thickened the air. Radios crackled with overlapping voices, every transmission edged with fear. Still no contact with Ranger Hale. Thermals are useless, storm interference. State support is grounded, weather's too bad. Sheriff Holloway stared at the map, jaw clenched. The warning shot replayed in his mind. Clean, controlled, a message. Emily stood slightly apart from the others, eyes fixed on the ridge lines etched into the paper. Her mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was already out there, calculating wind patterns, angles, blind spots. The mountain felt familiar in a way she hadn't let herself acknowledge in years. Holloway broke the silence. If he's at the ranger station, he's not just hiding, he's waiting. For what? A deputy asked. For us, Emily said quietly. Several heads turned toward her again. No one laughed this time. There's a family stranded there, Holloway said grimly. Tourists. Their car broke down before the storm hit. Emily's chest tightened. Civilians changed everything. They always did. We can't rush in blind, a deputy argued. He's got elevation and cover. And he knows you'll come heavy and loud, Emily replied, which is exactly what he wants. Holloway studied her, the lines in his face deepening. Then tell me what you do. Emily inhaled slowly. This was the moment she'd avoided for years, the moment where hiding stopped being an option. He'll have eyes on the road, she said, probably set up to funnel you into a kill zone, but the storm limits long-range visibility. He'll rely on sound and movement. You need to stop thinking like a search team and start thinking like prey. The word landed hard. One deputy bristled. We're not. We already are, Emily interrupted, her tone calm but firm. He proved that with the first shot. Silence followed, then Holloway nodded once. Okay, we adapt. Teams rolled out under blackout conditions. Engines cut early. Boots crunched softly in fresh snow. The storm swallowed them whole. Emily rode in the back of a cruiser, staring out at the white blur beyond the window. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, steady despite the chaos around her. She hadn't held a rifle in years. She told herself that mattered. The convoy stopped a mile short of the ranger station. From there, they'd proceed on foot. Wind lashed at their faces, needles of ice cutting through exposed skin. Visibility dropped to barely 20 yards. Radios were turned to whisper level. Every shadow looked like movement. Emily stayed near the rear, observing. She noticed things the others didn't. The unnatural quiet where wind should have howled louder. The absence of animal tracks. The way the snow drifted differently near a cluster of rocks. She leaned toward Holloway. He's closer than you think. As if on cue, a second shot rang out. This one wasn't a warning. The round tore into a tree inches from an officer's head, showering him with splinters. He hit the ground hard, scrambling for cover. "Contact, contact," someone shouted. Panic threatened to unravel discipline. Officers shouted directions over each other. Flashlights flickered on instinctively, cutting bright, useless beams through the snow. "Lights off," Emily shouted. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Another shot cracked. This one struck a radio, exploding plastic and static. Jensen was dismantling them piece by piece. "He's hurting you," Emily said urgently. "Pull back from the trees. He's elevated North Ridge." "How do you know?" Holloway demanded. Emily didn't answer. She didn't have time. A third shot rang out, closer now, too close. From the darkness ahead came a scream. "Ranger Station, he's inside, he's inside," a voice cried over the radio before dissolving into static. Emily's breath caught. Hostages. The situation escalated instantly from pursuit to siege. Holloway swore under his breath, "We need eyes, we need a shot." No one answered him. They all knew the truth. There was no clean angle. The ranger station windows were narrow, frosted, reinforced. The storm made long-range precision nearly impossible, and Jensen knew it. From inside the station, a loud bang echoed, something heavy hitting a wall. Emily imagined it vividly. The way Jensen would control the room. The way he'd position people between himself and the windows. The way he'd force law enforcement to hesitate. She stepped forward. "I can get you a shot." Every head snapped toward her. "You said you were trained," Holloway said slowly. "What kind of trained?" Emily hesitated again. Memories surged, cold ranges, endless drills, a voice correcting her breathing until it became instinct. "The kind that doesn't miss," she said. A deputy scoffed weakly. "In this weather, from where?" Emily turned toward the slope rising behind them. "There's a ridge line 200 yards above the station. Wind break on the east face. Narrow window, but it's there." Holloway followed her gaze. "That's a brutal climb." "I know. And you want to go alone?" Emily nodded. "I move quieter that way." Another crash echoed from the ranger station. A child's cry pierced the storm. That decided it. Holloway swallowed hard. "What do you need?" Emily exhaled. "One rifle, a bolt-action, clean glass, and radio silence." The deputies stared at her like she just asked for the moon. "You're a civilian," one said. "This is insane." Emily met his eyes. So is letting him take his time. Holloway made the call. They handed her the rifle reluctantly. As she checked the weight, adjusted the sling, and tested the bolt, something shifted. Her movements changed, economical, precise, familiar. A veteran officer noticed, his brow furrowed. "Where did you learn to handle it like that?" he murmured. Emily didn't answer. She started up the ridge, disappearing into the white. The climb was brutal. Ice burned her lungs. Wind clawed at her balance. But her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. Step, breathe, count. At the top, she dropped low behind a rock outcrop and settled in. Below her, barely visible through the storm, the ranger station glowed faintly. She adjusted the scope. Wind speed, angle, distance, all shifting, all hostile. Inside the station, a silhouette moved. Emily slowed her breathing until the world narrowed to a single point. Far below, officers waited, unaware that history was about to catch up with the woman they never took seriously. And somewhere in the storm, Mark Jensen made the mistake of believing no one could see him. The storm had become a living wall of white. Snow whipped horizontally, hissing past Emily's face like thousands of tiny knives. Visibility was minimal, barely 50 feet, and the mountain's ridges were treacherous, hidden under a slick glaze of ice. Every step she took toward the high ridge threatened a fall that could end her mission, or her life. Her gloves tightened around the bolt-action rifle, custom stock worn smooth from years of training she had never disclosed. She scanned the ranger station through her scope. Inside, shadows moved, too deliberate to be random. One man, hostages, too many lives resting on a single moment. Emily whispered to herself, steadying her breath. One chance, one. She adjusted the focus, estimating the wind gusts against the trajectory. The snowstorm played tricks with perception, bending light, masking distance. Calculations raced through her mind, angle, drift, spin, all instinct, all muscle memory. Below, radio static crackled nervously. Holloway's voice, clipped and anxious, reached her. Emily status. Visual confirmed, she whispered, barely audible over the wind. Hostages and him. I've got a clean line if the wind holds. Don't do anything stupid, Holloway urged, though even he sounded uncertain. She ignored him. There was no choice now. Every second waiting increased the risk to the civilians inside. Jensen had already proven he could strike with precision from impossible distances. She had to end it before he escalated. Through the scope, she saw Jensen's silhouette move deliberately toward the hostages. His weapon glinted, aimed at the nearest window. Emily's pulse didn't rise. It never did when she needed it most. Training kicked in. Every muscle, every neuron focused on the rifle, the line, the shot. She exhaled slowly, letting the wind carry away the tremor in her hands. The scope's crosshairs hovered over the target. Time stretched. 1 heartbeat. 2. She squeezed the trigger gently. The shot cracked. It split the storm's howl with unnatural clarity. Snow leapt from the ridge as the bullet flew, spinning, cutting through wind resistance with surgical precision. Inside the ranger station, Jensen's rifle slammed to the ground. He had been about to fire. The shot stopped him mid-motion. A round ricocheted harmlessly into the wall behind the hostages. Panic flashed across his face, a brief human flicker in the shadow of his cold calculation. The hostages didn't know what had saved them, but Emily did. She watched him stumble back, trying to locate the shooter, scanning the ridge frantically. His eyes were untrained, or rather, trained to expect conventional opposition. He didn't know someone like her existed, someone who had learned to anticipate impossible angles and strike from impossible distances. Below, Holloway's voice trembled. Emily, how? She didn't answer, she couldn't. The snowstorm swallowed her words. Jensen bolted toward the nearest exit, abandoning the hostages entirely, but Emily had predicted the path. She repositioned the rifle, calculated the new angle. Another shot. No, not yet. The goal wasn't to kill, yet, just to keep control, to buy time. Time for the officers below to secure the civilians. She heard boots scrambling, commands shouted through snow-blinded radios. She allowed herself a fleeting glance at the faces of the officers struggling to maintain order. Relief, confusion, fear, and then recognition. They began to understand that the woman they had underestimated was not ordinary. Emily scanned again, seeing Jensen hesitate. He froze, hands shaking over the rifle he had meant to use. This was unfamiliar territory for him, being outmatched by someone invisible, unremarkable, until that one perfect shot. And then a sharp movement, a child reached for a window ledge. Emily's stomach tightened. Her hands didn't waver. She adjusted, small, precise movements, and focused. Another warning shot was unnecessary. He was trapped. The officers below rushed in, slipping carefully over the snow, weapons raised. The hostages were ushered out, shivering, terrified, but alive. Emily remained hidden, perched above the ridge, still scanning. She knew better than to lower her guard. Jensen might still be alive. A faint echo carried across the mountains, the distant howl of sirens struggling against the storm, the pounding of adrenaline, the heartbeat of a town on edge. Emily's own heartbeat was steady. She had executed what no civilian, no law enforcement officer could have done. And yet, as she lowered the rifle slightly, a small part of her tensed, not for the shot she had made, but for the reaction she now anticipated. The officers climbed the ridge cautiously, looking up at her. Their eyes widened, mouths opening in disbelief. Who trained you?" one whispered almost to himself. Emily didn't answer. She allowed the snowstorm to cover her retreat, slipping back along the ridge like a ghost. But inside, a memory stirred, one she had buried deep. A voice, a lesson, a past that no one in Black Ridge could ever imagine. Somewhere down below, Holloway realized the truth, but only partially. "Emily Carter, that was no lucky shot," he muttered. And for the first time, the mountain seemed to acknowledge her, not as a civilian, but as something far more dangerous. Somewhere in the storm, Jensen survived, and he was furious. The storm finally began to relent, leaving the mountain ridges etched in jagged white and the night air biting at every exposed inch of skin. The ranger station, now cleared of hostages, was quiet except for the occasional crack of ice underfoot. Officers trudged through the snow toward their vehicles, exhausted, shaking, and pale from adrenaline. For the first time in hours, the terror of the past night gave way to a fragile relief. Emily crouched behind a rock formation, rifle slung across her back, surveying the chaos below. Her movements were fluid, precise, practiced. A predator who had just proven her worth without a single word of explanation. The storm had made her invisible, allowed her a vantage point no one else could hold. Holloway's team approached the ranger station, talking in low, hurried whispers. "We need to file reports," one officer muttered. "He got away." "Got away," another voice snapped. "We almost lost people. One shot saved lives, but who fires like that?" Emily's fingers flexed around the rifle instinctively, though it had done its job. She didn't respond. She had no desire for recognition, no need to explain herself. Yet the officers below were already whispering. Something about the way she had calculated wind, angle, distance. It didn't fit any civilian training. A veteran sniper among them shook his head, squinting at the ridge where Emily had perched. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. "That wasn't luck. Nobody shoots like that by accident, not in this weather, not at that distance. That shot was calculated, deliberate." Holloway's jaw tightened. He turned toward the younger officers, trying to maintain control. "We've trained for years. We know our distance, our wind charts, everything. That shot shouldn't have been possible." One deputy's eyes widened. "She's not telling us something, is she?" Holloway sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't know, but it's time we find out." Meanwhile, Emily had already begun to descend the ridge, moving through snow and ice with deliberate care. She didn't want anyone following her. Not now, not ever. The storm had been her shield, and she had used it perfectly. Yet even as she descended, a quiet voice in her mind tugged at memories she tried to bury. Training. Endless hours at ranges she couldn't talk about. Mentors whose faces had disappeared into secrecy. Techniques taught to her with a precision that demanded perfection. Every shot, every breath, every heartbeat had been rehearsed, repeated, refined. She reached the base of the ridge just as a vehicle arrived, headlights cutting through the remaining snow like searching beams. Holloway stepped out, coat heavy, boots sinking into snow. His face was pale, eyes hard. "Emily," he called, voice low but firm, "you need to come with me now." She stopped, adjusting her scarf. For what? You're going to have to answer questions. She didn't flinch. I've already done my part. You don't understand, Holloway said, stepping closer. Your shot, it wasn't just impossible, it was precise beyond anything I've seen. And some of us, he paused, glancing at the veteran sniper nearby. We recognize the stance, the adjustments, the breathing, the control. You weren't trained casually. You were trained well, by someone extraordinary. Emily's chest tightened. She had anticipated this moment her whole life. The moment when someone would see past the civilian facade and recognize the truth. She didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch, letting the snow crunch under their boots, letting the officers below whisper among themselves. Recognition, she knew, could be dangerous. Holloway pressed on. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Who trained you? Her eyes flicked to the veteran sniper who avoided her gaze, a flicker of disbelief in his expression. Emily could feel his thoughts, skepticism mixed with awe. He's asking the wrong question, she said quietly. It isn't about who trained me, it's about why I left it behind. Holloway's eyes narrowed. You left what behind? Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. The truth was complicated, layered with loss and betrayal she wasn't ready to relive. Yet the men around her were relentless. Curiosity was a living thing. It prowled, it clawed, it demanded. You can't just walk away after a shot like that, Holloway said, voice rising slightly. We have to know who you are, how you can do this. Lives were on the line. Emily shifted slightly, glancing over the ridge where the ranger station had stood moments ago. Snow drifted through the broken windows. She could still feel the heat of the moment, the pressure, the tension, the fear in the hostage's eyes. I'll tell you what I can, she said softly, almost to herself. But some truths aren't meant for this world, not yet. The veteran sniper finally spoke, voice low and hesitant. Emily Carter, that stance, that precision, I've seen it before, on classified footage. Years ago, a legendary sniper disappeared after one mission gone wrong. Nobody thought she survived or trained anyone else. Holloway froze. The name didn't register immediately, but the look on the veteran's face told him everything. Emily had just gone from quiet volunteer to living legend. Someone whose skills could change outcomes in ways no one dared imagine. Emily felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders, a shadow she had carried for years. She had escaped this life once, buried it under snow, under anonymity, under ordinary days. But now the mountain, the storm, and Jensen had forced it all back. She stepped back, the snow crunching under her boots. Some questions, she said, voice steady, are better left unanswered. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Holloway studied her face, searching for cracks, for lies, for reassurance. But Emily's gaze was unflinching, calm, unyielding. A force that had survived the impossible now stood among them, invisible only in their assumptions. A faint hum of radio static interrupted the moment, followed by a distant, desperate call. Sheriff, another sighting, East Ridge, movement. Emily's eyes narrowed. She already knew this was no coincidence. Someone or something was coming. And in that instant, Holloway realized that the quiet woman he had ignored hours ago wasn't just trained. She was dangerous in ways no one in Black Ridge had ever imagined. The storm had cleared, but the questions and the threats were just beginning. The first light of dawn broke weakly over Black Ridge, casting a pale silver across snow-laden pines. The storm had receded, but the mountain still held its secrets in the folds of fog and jagged ridges. Officers huddled near the ranger station, scanning the slopes with binoculars and thermal gear. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every movement carried potential danger. Emily Carter walked quietly through the clearing, boots crunching over frozen snow. She kept her eyes on the horizon, careful not to reveal the subtle tension in her shoulders. Even now, after saving lives, after demonstrating a skill no one could comprehend, she felt the familiar weight of being hunted, not by criminals this time, but by a past she had tried to erase. A black SUV approached slowly, tires crunching over snow, engine humming low. The vehicle stopped just short of the ranger station. A man stepped out, tall, stiff, with the unmistakable bearing of someone used to authority, military or otherwise. He scanned the area with cold, assessing eyes, and then froze when he saw Emily. "Emily," he said, voice low, almost disbelieving. She stopped in her tracks. Something in the tone, the recognition, made her blood run cold. "Commander Daniels," she said evenly, keeping her voice calm, neutral, but inside her chest tightened. He took a step closer, gaze piercing. "It's really you." Emily's fingers itched toward her rifle, not because she feared him, but because years of instinct told her to always prepare for danger. "I'm not who you think I am," she said. Daniels shook his head slowly, a mixture of awe and concern on his face. "You've been hiding, and yet you're still the same. You never lost it, did you?" Emily's jaw tightened. The name alone brought back memories she had buried under layers of ordinary life. Memories of sniper ranges at dawn, frozen drills, wind calculations, missions she could never speak of, faces she could never remember without flinching. "I've survived," she said simply. "You've done more than survive," Daniels replied. He motioned toward the officers below who had begun to notice the interaction. "You saved lives with one shot, one impossible shot." His eyes flicked to the ridge behind her, then back to hers. "Nobody else could have done that." Emily's gaze lowered. She had known the risk of being discovered, of someone from her past finding her in a small town, but she hadn't expected it so soon, so publicly. "It wasn't meant to be noticed," she said. Daniel smiled faintly, almost bitterly. "Emily, you were trained by someone no one thought existed anymore. A sniper legend, disappeared after a classified mission, and somehow you carried that skill forward, in secret, and yet it's undeniable now." A murmur ran through the officers. The veteran sniper finally spoke, voice shaking slightly. "You trained under." Emily's eyes snapped up, meeting his. She didn't confirm or deny, not yet. Some truths were dangerous. Some truths demanded control. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They'll never understand what you're capable of, but I do. That shot perfect. Wind, distance, pressure, it was textbook. You didn't just aim, you anticipated, you calculated, you acted like the ghost herself." Emily's pulse quickened. The words brought back everything. Her mentor's voice, his strict corrections, the endless hours of cold mornings and colder nights, learning to become invisible, lethal, precise. She had walked away once, leaving all of it behind, but he had found her anyway. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, her voice soft but sharp. "Because they're watching," Daniel said. His eyes scanned the ridge, the valley, the clearing where Emily had made her stand. "After what happened today, the government's going to take notice. That fugitive, the impossible shot, they're going to want answers and they'll come to you. They always do." Emily swallowed. She had hoped the mountains would remain a sanctuary, but her skills, her past, had a gravitational pull that wouldn't allow her to remain hidden. Daniels continued, voice low but urgent. "I came to warn you, and to remind you that you are part of a line of operators trained to survive impossible odds. You didn't inherit that skill by accident. You inherited it because someone believed in you, someone legendary, and now you've proven that legacy without anyone knowing, except me." Emily's fingers twitched, brushing against her rifle. Her mind raced, calculating, weighing choices. She could disappear again, vanish into the mountains as she had before. Or she could confront the inevitable, her past, her mentor's legacy, the truth about who she had become. Daniel studied her silently. Then quietly he said, "Emily, the world doesn't know who you are, but today one shot told them everything. They'll start asking questions. Some of those questions won't be safe." The officers below whispered among themselves, a mixture of disbelief and awe. Some tried to meet Emily's gaze. Some looked away, unsettled by the aura of controlled danger surrounding her. Emily exhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. She had trained to be invisible, to act without recognition. Yet here she was, standing in the open, seen by someone who knew the truth, and by dozens of others who only glimpsed a fraction. "I left that life behind," she said finally, voice steady but low. "I survived to live, not to be remembered." Daniels nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Legends don't get to choose when they're remembered, but you just became unforgettable." Emily's eyes flicked back to the ridge, toward the direction the fugitive had fled. Despite the adrenaline of victory, the storm of her past had arrived with Daniel's presence. She knew it wasn't over. The sun broke weakly through the clouds, glinting on the snow. A single, impossible ridge line called to her, and Emily felt the familiar pull of a world she had thought she had left behind. Her secret, the one she had buried beneath years of ordinary days and small-town anonymity, had been discovered. And for the first time in years, Emily realized hiding was no longer an option. Somewhere in the mountains, the fugitive still lurked, unaware that he had just been outmatched by a woman whose training was legendary, and whose mentor's name alone could make governments and criminals alike stop breathing. Emily Carter had survived today, but the storm that had cleared outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to find her. And the past she thought she had left behind was coming to claim her. The mountains of Black Ridge seemed peaceful under the morning light, but Emily Carter knew better. Beneath the snow, beneath the calm, lay the echoes of the storm she had carried inside her for years. Each footstep through the powder reminded her of another mountain, another ridge, another mission that had forced her to vanish from the world. She walked quietly, boots crunching, as Commander Daniels fell into step beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Words were unnecessary. The silence carried the weight of the past, the training, the decisions, the losses she had buried. Daniels finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "You left because you had to. You saw what the world expected from you, and it wasn't right." Emily's jaw tightened. Memories flashed. The cold desert ranges, the endless drills, the missions that blurred the line between right and wrong. She had been trained to be the perfect sniper, precise, lethal, invisible, a prodigy under the tutelage of the legendary sniper known only as Hawk. Every calculation, every breath, every heartbeat drilled into her until instinct and training were one. But then came the mission that changed everything. The target had been high-profile, dangerous. Civilian casualties were predicted to be minimal if the operation went as planned. Yet, when she arrived at the observation point, the calculations shifted. Variables that had been considered safe exploded into risk. Innocent lives were about to be lost, and she had been ordered to take the shot anyway. She hadn't. Emily had made the choice that no one in her line of training could forgive. She had disobeyed. Her mentor, Hawk, had looked at her with disappointment and understanding at once. "Sometimes the mission isn't the target," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's the soul we save by refusing to follow orders blindly." That night she disappeared. She erased herself from databases, changed identities, moved to a remote mountain town no one would think to search. She took up ordinary jobs, hid in plain sight, and vowed never to take another life unless it was unavoidable. Daniels broke the silence. "They'll come looking now. The government, private contractors, everyone who knows what you're capable of. They'll want to know who trained you, and they'll want that training back." Emily's eyes hardened. She had anticipated this moment. The fugitive incident had been small compared to the world that could swallow her if she revealed herself. And yet, hiding was no longer an option. The skills that had saved the hostages yesterday were a beacon to people who would exploit them. She remembered Hawk's voice one last time. "Disappear, survive, and if the world needs you, make sure it's on your terms." Below them, the ranger station buzzed with activity. Officers still whispered about the woman who had taken impossible shots. They couldn't understand how a volunteer had single-handedly controlled the storm, stopped a dangerous mercenary, and saved civilians without hesitation. All they saw was results. Emily saw consequences. Daniel studied her carefully. "You've been hiding from your past, Emily, but the world isn't hiding from you." She exhaled, snowflakes melting on her eyelashes. "I didn't disappear to run," she said quietly. "I disappeared to survive, and to make sure I never became the weapon they wanted me to be again." Daniels nodded slowly. "And now?" Emily's gaze returned to the ridge where Jensen had fled, to the mountain pass that had been both her shield and her proving ground. "Now," she said, "I make sure nothing like that happens again." She thought of the children, the hostages, the lives she had saved, not just yesterday but during her secret training missions, countless lives that would never know her name. That was always the price of perfection. No recognition, no reward, only survival and consequence. Daniels watched her, recognizing the steel in her posture. "The government doesn't forgive, Emily, and neither do the people who know your history. They'll come for you whether you like it or not." She nodded, accepting the inevitable. Her past, buried under layers of snow and secrecy, had a gravitational pull that could no longer be resisted. And while she had trained to vanish, to strike, to survive, she had never trained for being hunted by history itself. "Then we prepare," Emily said, "because the storm that came yesterday was just the beginning." A distant echo carried across the valley, the faintest sound of movement, footsteps crunching snow, too deliberate to belong to ordinary wildlife. Emily's eyes narrowed. The mountain, her sanctuary, had already become a stage. Daniels glanced around. "They're coming." Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she scanned the ridges, measuring distance, wind, slope. Her mind moved like a clockwork machine, instinct and training fused. "Yes," she said finally, "but I've never been unprepared." For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself a flash of something long suppressed. Anticipation. Not fear, not doubt, pure focus. The storm outside had ended, but a far more dangerous storm, the one of her past, was now closing in. The officers below, the command structures above, even the fugitive who had survived, all were drawn to her by the same force she had spent years trying to escape. The skill and legacy of a sniper who could strike from anywhere, at any distance, and vanish without a trace. Emily Carter had survived the impossible before, but the coming threat would demand more than survival. It would demand mastery over the very life she had built, and the ghost of the past she had tried to leave behind. And somewhere in the hidden valleys beyond Black Ridge, someone was already watching, waiting, calculating. Emily's past had returned, and this time there would be no hiding. The sun had barely risen, painting the snow in muted shades of gray, when Emily Carter felt the first real weight of what was coming. The mountains were calm now, deceptive in their serenity, but she could sense it, movement, distant but deliberate. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't a coincidence. The fugitive, Jensen, had survived yesterday, and the storm of her past had tracked her here. She moved quickly, boots crunching through snow, rifle slung across her back. Commander Daniels trailed behind, silent, his gaze sweeping the ridges and valleys as if he expected danger to appear at any moment. Neither spoke. There was no need. In the frozen mountain silence, anticipation was enough. Emily reached the ridge where she had perched during the previous day's rescue. The snow had drifted, erasing footprints, hiding the paths that had led her to success. She scanned the valley below with her binoculars. Movement, faint, deliberate, caught her eye. A shadow weaving through the trees, stopping to peer upward, almost as if testing the winds. Jensen. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't expected him to return so quickly, and yet this was exactly the test she had been waiting for, though it was more than a test of skill. This time, the stakes weren't just a rescue or survival. They were the culmination of everything she had tried to leave behind. Daniels broke the silence, voice low but tense. "You've got a line of retreat." Emily didn't answer immediately. Her mind was already calculating distances, wind direction, trajectory, angles. Every thought, every heartbeat was a calculation she had spent years perfecting. "I have options," she said finally. "But this isn't just about retreat. It's about control. We can't let him dictate the terms." Below, the valley stretched in a series of frozen steps, each one a potential vantage point for a sniper. Emily crouched behind a boulder, adjusting the rifle in her hands. The wind had shifted, carrying sound in unpredictable directions. She inhaled, steadying her breathing. The shadow moved again, closer, faster. Jensen had learned something overnight. He wasn't just fleeing anymore. He was hunting, testing her. Emily felt the rush of recognition, the thrill of danger sharpening her senses. Every nerve in her body was alive. This was what she had trained for, though she had sworn never to need it again. Daniels cleared his throat softly. "Are you sure about this?" Emily's eyes didn't leave the target. "There's no other choice. He's baiting us, and he'll escalate if we don't act." She moved into position, checking her scope. Distance, 320 meters. Wind, variable, gusting from the northeast at 20 miles per hour. Temperature, Celsius. Elevation, 450 feet above the target. Variables impossible for any ordinary sniper, but routine for her. The shadow paused. Jensen was watching, waiting, unaware of the predator perched above him. Emily adjusted her breathing, tightening her cheek against the stock, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Her finger eased the trigger. The rifle bucked slightly under the recoil. The bullet tore through the wind with surgical precision. Jensen froze, stunned by the near miss. He dropped to cover instinctively, realizing too late that he was no longer in control. Emily's heart remained steady. She wasn't thrilled by the kill, she didn't need it. She needed leverage, control, survival, hers and everyone else. Daniels radioed quietly to the officers below. "Movement spotted, do not engage. She's handling it." Emily adjusted again, tracking Jensen's retreat toward the tree line. He had been reckless, overconfident. She had anticipated every step of his escape route, every hesitation. And yet, even as she calculated, a fragment of doubt crept in. Jensen wasn't ordinary. He wasn't predictable. If she misjudged, if she faltered, the consequences could be catastrophic. Another shadow appeared, faint, moving quickly from the east ridge. Emily froze. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't expected backup. Not so soon, not this precise. Her eyes narrowed as she traced the figure. Another trained operator, private mercenary. She couldn't tell immediately, but she knew instinctively it was dangerous. "Emily," Daniels said, his voice tight, "you need to watch your flank." She acknowledged silently, shifting her body slightly to remain concealed while maintaining her line of sight on Jensen. Two threats now, one she understood, one she did not. Time stretched. The wind carried the faintest sound of movement across the snow. Emily's muscles tensed. Every breath became deliberate. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. This wasn't just a sniper challenge. This was the culmination of years of skill, training, instinct, and consequence. Jensen moved again, trying to flank her position. Emily anticipated the motion and adjusted her scope. She whispered under her breath, a habit from years of drills. "One chance. One, make it count." The shot fired. Another crack across the frozen valley. Jensen hit the ground, stunned, unarmed for the first time in hours. The other shadow froze, eyes widening as it realized it was being watched, targeted. Emily remained calm, scanning both threats. Her mind raced ahead, already planning her next move. She knew the storm wasn't behind her, it was inside her. She could survive this, control it, master it. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then Jensen bolted again, desperate, panicked, and exposed. Emily calculated the distance, wind, trajectory, and released the final shot, not to kill but to immobilize. The round struck his weapon, shattering it harmlessly but decisively. He fell face first into the snow. Below, the officers rushed forward to secure the threat. Emily slung the rifle over her shoulder, her pulse steady, mind already shifting. She had passed the test, her final test, not of skill alone, but of control, judgment, and survival under pressure. Daniels approached, voice tight with a mixture of relief and awe. You did it." Emily exhaled, glancing at him. "It wasn't about me. It was about stopping him before he hurt anyone else." The veteran sniper stepped forward, eyes wide. "She's unreal. Nobody should be able to do that under these conditions. That was legendary." Emily said nothing. She had no desire for accolades. Recognition was dangerous. What mattered was that the threat was neutralized and that she had proven, if only to herself, that she could still survive the impossible. But even as the officers secured Jensen and the other shadow disappeared into the tree line, Emily knew this wasn't the end. The world had taken notice. Her past, her skills, and her legend were no longer secrets. She had survived the storm yesterday and passed the test today, but the real challenge was only beginning. And somewhere far beyond the mountains, someone was watching her, calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The final test had been survived, but the war, the one she had been running from her entire life, was just beginning. The mountains of Black Ridge were quiet now, deceptively serene after the chaos of the past 48 hours. Snow clung to the ridges, glinting in the pale sunlight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a frozen world of shadows, ice, and whispered echoes. But Emily Carter knew better. Peace was temporary. Danger never truly left her. Jensen had been secured, but the world had begun noticing. Satellite scans, local radio chatter, and rogue cell signals were already piecing together what had happened. The impossible shot, the one that saved lives against all odds, was no longer anonymous. Emily had left a mark, one that could draw attention from authorities, mercenaries, or worse, anyone seeking the legacy of the legendary sniper known only as Hawk. She moved carefully along a narrow ridge above the ranger station, scanning the valley below. Her rifle rested lightly against her shoulder. The storm had honed her senses, trained her instincts, and sharpened her mind. But this wasn't about skill, it was about judgment, control, choosing the moment that would define her without letting history repeat the mistakes that had once forced her to disappear. "Emily," Commander Daniels said from behind her, voice low, "you sure about this?" Her eyes never left the valley. "I'm sure. It's the only way to end it cleanly. No more games." Below, officers were positioning themselves to secure the area completely. Communications had been restored and backup was on the way. But Emily's eyes were on the ridge 2 miles to the east. A faint shimmer in the snow, a sniper attempting to set a trap, unseen by the others. Jensen's accomplice, perhaps, or another predator drawn by the legend she carried. Emily crouched, breathing deliberately, aligning the scope. Every variable was running in her mind. Wind, distance, elevation, temperature. Every calculation performed instinctively, a ghost of years spent learning under Hawk's relentless guidance. The target moved. A sudden snap of snow beneath a boot alerted her. She tracked the movement, silently adjusting, waiting for the perfect opening. "Emily, it's risky," Daniels began. "Don't speak," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, controlled, lethal in its quiet authority. "If I miss, we all die." Time slowed. Every second stretched into eternity. She counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. The shot rang out. Clear, clean, perfect. Snow erupted where the round struck, disarming the threat before it could react. The secondary sniper crumpled, unable to aim, unable to recover. Below, officers moved in, securing the ridge, stunned to see no fatality, only Emily's intervention. She lowered the rifle, taking in the valley. The danger had ended, the threat neutralized. Daniels approached, voice barely audible above the wind. You didn't have to kill him." Emily's eyes remained fixed on the fallen target. "I didn't," she said. "I never do unless it's the only choice. One shot can end a life or save countless others. You learn that quickly when your mentor taught you to calculate not just the trajectory, but the consequences. The officers looked at her differently now. Respect, awe, disbelief, all mingled in their expressions. Some tried to speak, but the words faltered under the weight of understanding. She wasn't just a volunteer. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a weapon, a legend, and now, undeniably, a protector. Daniels finally said what everyone was thinking. Emily Carter, you're extraordinary. Nobody in this town or this country understands what you just did. She let a small, almost imperceptible smile touch her lips. Recognition wasn't her goal, but acknowledgement didn't hurt. Not yet. She had survived the storm, faced the threats, and proven the legacy of Hawk lived on, not in secrecy, but in action. Yet even as relief settled, Emily knew this wasn't the end. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the world had begun taking notice. Intelligence agencies, contractors, and those who remembered Hawk's legend would start asking questions. Her skills, her training, her existence, they were a beacon now, and the storm that followed her would be constant. She slung the rifle over her back and began to move down the ridge, snow crunching underfoot. Below, the officers called out, trying to keep up. Daniels fell into step beside her, silently acknowledging her skill, her resolve. Emily thought briefly of Hawk, the mentor who had forced her to choose between obedience and conscience, between skill and morality. She had survived because of that guidance. She had carried the lessons into obscurity, living quietly, waiting for a moment like this. Now she understood fully. Legends never truly disappear. They survive. They adapt. And sometimes one perfect shot is all it takes to prove their existence. Reaching the base of the ridge, Emily turned briefly to the valley. The threat was gone, the hostages safe, the fugitive neutralized. The impossible had been accomplished. And yet, as she gazed across the mountains, she knew the story wasn't over. The world had glimpsed her truth, and with that truth came inevitable consequences. Daniels looked at her. Where do you go from here? Emily smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the horizon where the mountains met the sky. Anywhere I want, she said. Legends don't need recognition, only one shot to prove they were real. The sun reflected off the snow, glinting like a promise. Emily Carter disappeared once more into the mountains, a ghost in plain sight, a protector who no one could fully understand, a living legend whose story had just begun. And somewhere far beyond the peaks, someone remembered her name, Hawk, and the lesson they had passed on. One shot, one choice, one life forever changed. The mountain air was still. The storm had passed. But Emily Carter's legacy, hidden, lethal, and extraordinary, would never fade. The legend had been revealed, and the world would never forget the woman who had made one shot count more than 1,000 lives could imagine.